Hey, before we get to the podcast, we want to share with you an exciting new way you can help support the podcast.
Yes, we have finally opened a Patreon account. Go to patreon.com/2njb to check it out.
We have 4 different tiers, and they each allow you to support the podcast at a different level, and you get really cool rewards. So go to patreon.com/2njb and help us continue putting out great content for you. This is Eitan Weinstein.
And I'm Naor Menninger, and you're listening to Two Nice Jewish Boys.
On a foggy morning in London, over a century ago, a visionary chemist met with one of Britain's most influential politicians. This wasn't just any meeting, it was a pivotal moment that would forever alter the course of Jewish history. Chaim Weizmann, a Russian immigrant and a passionate Zionist, found himself in the drawing room of Lord Arthur James Balfour. Armed with his sharp intellect and relentless drive, Weizmann presented his case for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. His argument was compelling, blending the urgent need for a safe haven for Jews with the potential benefits to the British Empire. This meeting, pivotal in its outcome, led to the historic Balfour Declaration of 1917, which proclaimed British support for the establishment of, quote, a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Today, we delve into this extraordinary story with Professor Jehuda Reinharz, a distinguished historian and former president of Brandeis University. As co-author of the biography Chaim Weizmann, A Biography, Professor Reinharz brings us closer to understanding the man behind the political triumph. Through his journey from the shtetls of Belarus to the highest echelons of global politics, Weizmann navigated the turbulent waters of early 20th century geopolitics with a singular goal in mind, the realization of a Jewish state. And when could this be more relevant than today? Professor Jehuda Reinharz is currently the Richard Koret Professor of Modern Jewish History at Brandeis. He's the recipient of the President of Israel Prize, along with many other awards and accolades, far too long to list. He's also president and CEO of the Jack, Joseph, and Morton Mandel Foundation. We are thrilled to be joined on the podcast today by Professor Jehuda Reinharz to discuss the life and legacy of Chaim Weizmann, its relation to today, the current state of affairs for Zionism, and of course, as we have one of American academia's foremost scholars with us, how can we ignore the recent anti-Israel protests across U.S. university campuses? Stay tuned. This episode is sure to be an interesting one. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
Good. Pleasure to be here.
So where should we start?
The book, you co-authored the book with Professor Moti Golani.
Right.
So let's give him a credit, right?
Absolutely.
Moti
Golani, a former scholar, professor at Tel Aviv University, now in his last year.
Okay. And the book came out when exactly?
About a week ago.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Your timing is good.
All.
Yeah.
Why Chaim Weizmann?
For the same reason that you ask, why Chaim Weizmann? Because if I were to go on the street here, in this neighborhood or any neighborhood in Israel, and I would ask anybody, have you ever heard of Chaim Weizmann? They would say, you mean Ezra Weizmann? Do you mean the Weizmann Institute? What do you mean? Nobody knows anything about him. It's as if between Herzl and Ben Gurion, nothing happened.
How come?
For many reasons. Weizmann was a person who was an individualist. After World War I, he became very wealthy. And because of that, he didn't work for anybody. He just worked for himself, for the Zionist movement. He had a small circle of people around him who were supporters. When he didn't like one of them or they did not follow his instructions, they were simply let go. And that gave him a lot of power. Second, because he was a persona grata in the British high society and in government, he was a very valuable person. As you probably know, he provided an important service to Great Britain during the war with the invention of acetone, synthetic acetone, something which was very valuable to the war effort because it made all the guns, all the fireworks smokeless. That made a big difference.
Also,
and
many women all around the world.
The what?
Oh, and many women all around the world.
Yeah,
also,
the women came in stages. You had some before the war,
and some men also.
And no, not men, but no, not men. I mean, he liked men. He liked women.
No, I talk about the nail polish.
Oh, I see.
Solution.
No, he liked people. He needed people like air to breathe. Women, men. But he had quite a few liaisons. We don't really know too much about those. We know that they existed, but some we know more than others.
Okay.
But because of his invention, he had access to everybody in England. And people very often ask me, why is it, as you just did, why don't we know anything about Weizmann? Weizmann had a very, I should say, not very, low opinion of Ben-Gurion. He thought Ben-Gurion was a person who did not know much about international affairs. He was an important figure in Palestine as time passed on. He spent time in England, and Weizmann did not always treat him well. The two of them had only one thing in common. They both admired Weizmann. And other than that, there was not much of a relationship there. Weizmann did not have a party, as I said before. And therefore, when he finally was appointed president of the State of Israel in 1949, he was already old, sick, and there was no one to sort of hold the flag and say, there was a Chaim Weizmann. The only thing that was left was really the Weizmann Institute, which was created, which was named for him. Before that, it was something else, named for him. And that's pretty much it. So it's, if you see very often, as I've seen, exhibitions about Zionism here in Israel, very often Weizmann is absent. It's as if he didn't exist. And so that was one of the reasons that I got into this. And I'll tell you something that you might want to challenge me on. What I'm telling you is that without Weizmann, there would be no Jewish state today. Or at least not in 1948. Maybe there would have been a state later. But I don't think so. Because Weizmann had the power of personality that made him different. If you think about it, in 1918, he was not even yet the president of the World Zionist Organization. Since then, he saw every president of the United States, with the exception of Hoover, who was not in New York when he came to the United States. And if you think about it, he met President Wilson in 1919. I mean, what did President Wilson know about Weizmann? But he had more access to high society in America than in many other quarters in the Zionist organization.
Okay, fascinating.
First of all, how did he get so rich that he didn't have to? That's the most interesting to me.
Weizmann.
What did he do to make so much money?
You want to get into the business?
Yeah.
The acetone, the synthetic acetone that he created, which was something that no one in Great Britain was able to produce.
I see.
And he was the only one. And
how did he do it?
It's a synthetic acetone which was created in a lab. It's made out of grains of all sorts. It's made of grainy. In fact, at some point when he couldn't have access to what he wanted, he created other substances.
And he did this privately?
No. So what happened is that in 1914, a call went out from the Admiralty in Great Britain, looking for someone who could, in fact, produce a substance that would when mixed with cordite, would in fact make the guns, old guns of any sort, smokeless. And couldn't find anybody. until somebody remembered that Weizmann, who was teaching in England, had some invention of that sort. This was through a friend of his who brought it to the attention of Lloyd George, who was not yet the prime minister, and he was invited to come to London, and he presented his invention. Many other inventions were tried. His was the only one that was successful. And so they appointed him to the Admiralty. He actually had an official position. And he did one more thing. He said, I'm going to give you this invention without asking for money. And in fact, George Bernard Shaw, who was a well-known anti-Semite, actually wrote a play about Weizmann and Balfour. If I would have thought about it, I would have brought a play because it's quite entertaining, but it's anti-Semitic. And in which it shows Weizmann asked for nothing. And in that play, Balfour asks Weizmann, well, you don't want money, you don't want a title, what do you want? He says, I want Jerusalem. And Balfour says to him, okay, you got it. And we would have given you some other territories, but Jerusalem is yours. That's the myth. That's the myth about Weizmann.
So you
but let me explain why he got rich.
Yeah.
After the war, he in fact did get paid by the British something like 10,000 pounds. Decent money, but not the kind of money they would have had to pay if they would have had to import it. And but a substance of acetone, which you know because of, as you pointed out, fingers, became very important for the production of lacquer for cars. Cars then came into production big time, and his substance was important. He patented it. In fact, was able to team up with some factories in the United States, and he became very wealthy. Some years he made as much as 3 million pounds,
back then,
which
In
was
the 20s.
which was real money. I mean, it's still real money, but
With inflations, it's tens of millions.
he lived
probably.
in a very large house, which I visited. He had maids, he had a chauffeur, he had et cetera, and as you know, eventually he also built a house in Rehovot. He had he lived well. He lived like the British. In fact,
Was he born in the UK?
no, he was born in Belarusia.
Okay.
In a little town called Morton, and went through schooling, such as schooling was, in Pinsk and other places, also in Germany, then in Switzerland, where we got his doctorate, and then went to England and taught. So that substance, I mean, and by the way, many factories produced it. As I said, he could afford anything. So he never got paid, as I said before.
by the British government.
By the British government.
But he got royalties afterwards.
He got royalties afterwards because of his patent.
But one more
So-
thing I have to ask, just a little thing. Why did the British military wanted smokeless? Well, like, what was the logic behind the request?
So that the planes or the enemy could not see the smoke coming from the guns and therefore know where the soldiers were located.
Because
So-
planes just went into.
So
play.
every whether it's a gun or whether it's a something that's bigger than that,
A mortar or a...
they all produce smoke. But with acetone, they could not detect where the shooting came from. And so that became a very valuable.
And it was an advantage over the enemy in World War I. It was a major advantage for
I
the
actually
British?
don't know what the Germans had. I don't know what any other country had, but England had it.
It's interesting because the Germans had Huberman, right?
Yeah, but that came later. I mean, he got a prize in the war. I don't remember what the patent was, but Weizmann's invention, which by the way acetone used to be produced from wood, and all the woods of England would have been insufficient to produce the kind of amount of substance that they needed. So, as I said, very valuable, and made in factories. By the way. Weizmann prepared those factories. I mean, he was a big man. Because of that, he also got to know much of high society in England that became influential, and he had an open door to the prime minister, to any minister. People often ask me, well, where does this power of this guy come from? What's the secret? It may be maybe only one of the rare instances in history where an individual, without an army, without a party, without even the Jewish people behind him, without the Zionist movement being behind him during World War I, was able to, in fact, appear before ministers, appear before the prime minister, and make demands. He could meet anybody he wanted. In fact, one of his methods of operating was to not make appointments. He would just show up. And
the good old days.
Whether it's the prime minister, whether it's the minister for the colonies, it doesn't matter. He just walked in, and they were used to him.
You mentioned that he had the power of personality. Could you give us an example? Like what made his personality so unique, so different, so powerful?
I didn't know Weizmann personally, but from what I can tell from everything I've read and studied about him, first of all, he appeared as an authentic Jew. He had a very strong accent. He did not pretend to be anything but who he was. He was a proud Jew, spoke with a heavy accent, which he did not hide, did not try to hide. It was a Yiddish accent, it was a Russian accent, it was a whole combination of things. I mean, he did things that, the British never met a guy like him. He would tell jokes about Jews to the British. They loved it. And they laughed with him because he wasn't afraid. He was not worried about what impression he will make. He was 6 foot tall. He dressed well. He, in fact, was British. And he was loyal to the British. And so there are many questions that people ask me, which I can't answer. For example, why was it possible for him to meet any leader of any country in Europe, or in the United States for that matter, at his desire? Why? I don't have the answer for that. But I'll just give you examples. Mussolini, for example, invited him 4 times to come and meet with him. The presidents of France, of Holland, the Pope allowed him to come to the Vatican and to meet with his cardinals. And
then people wonder why we wonder why people think we control the world.
Absolutely, we control it. It's well known. He had absolutely no compunction about speaking truth to power. And you ask why the Balfour Declaration? I thought you would ask me that question.
Yeah, why the Balfour Declaration?
Thank you. So, what he received from Balfour was not a declaration. It was a letter. It was the same kind of a letter, or similar letter, that the British wrote, like all the great powers during the war, to the Armenians, to the Arabs, to the Kurds. None of them had a Weizmann. He took that letter and made it a declaration. As soon as the letter was published, he said, this is a British declaration, and it stuck. And the British, and he made the British, he convinced the British that this one sentence that you just quoted before, His British Majesty looks with favor on the equation, etc. He took that one letter and made a declaration and made the British believe that this was a commitment they could not retreat from. Mm-hmm. Because he was also very wealthy, this goes back to your question, he invited to his house leaders of the British Empire. Everybody came. Churchill, Lloyd George, all the ministers. I'll give you one instance of the kind of power that he had, and which was repeated many times over during his presidency of the Zionist organization. He was in England. I'm sorry. He went to the United States in 1921. Why did he go? Because he had a fight with Louis Brandeis. Louis Brandeis was probably the most important person in the world, in the Jewish world at that time, perhaps with the exception of Einstein. Weizmann, who already understood public relations, said to Einstein, who was sort of a Zionist, said to him, I'd like you to come with me to this convention in Cleveland, where the battle between those who adhered to Louis Brandeis' idea of Zionism, which was after the war, it's all about economics, whereas Weizmann said it's also about politics, and it's about government, and it's about getting a piece of land. And so he went to Cleveland, asked Einstein to come with him. And Einstein said, what am I going to do? So Weizmann said to him, look, I'm going to be traveling from city to city. You don't have to do anything. Just sit on the stage, try to look intelligent, look at the crowd, don't fall asleep, I'll talk. And the idea that Einstein was there, everybody knew who Einstein was after the war, was very powerful. He then went to Cleveland and defeated Louis Brandeis on his own turf in the United States, unheard of. While he's there, this brings me to the story. I'm going at length. He heard that Herbert Samuel, who was the High Commissioner for Palestine, was meeting with the Bedouins in Palestine. And it seemed that from the reports that Weizmann was getting, that he was making some concessions to the Bedouins in terms of land acquisition. Weizmann took the first boat home, and here's what he is able to do. This is in 1921. He calls up Lord Balfour at home on a Friday afternoon, and he says to him in so many words, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, I want a meeting at your house. And here are the people I want to come. The Prime Minister, Lord George. I want the Minister for the Colonies, who was Churchill, and a whole bunch of other people he mentioned. And Balfour says, okay. Next morning, they all show up.
Why? Why were they so like? Where
Right?
did he donate to the party or something?
He donated not a penny. Power of personality. If you were to ask me what exactly in that power, I'd say to you, I don't know. And I've studied him probably as much as anybody.
There's no indication of from records from Churchill or from Lloyd George or writings that why they agreed to meet with this person?
They were charmed and totally taken off their feet by Weizmann.
It almost sounds like he's
Tony Stark.
He's their drug dealer and he has them hooked. They just show up to wherever he says.
But here's what
he's got the good stuff.
Here's what happens at the meeting. He does something that you don't do in a British context.
Say pants instead of trousers.
What he says is he addresses the Prime Minister. He says, you know what your guy Herbert Samuel has been doing? And he really blasts. Now, you don't do this in England. You're polite. You play around with words. And the Prime Minister, Lloyd George, turns to Churchill and he says, who was the Minister of Colonies and therefore the boss of Herbert Samuel. And he said to him, is this true, what he says? And Churchill is totally rattled. And he says, it's true, but he says to Weizmann, look, I'll make it up for you. You can bring illegal weapons to Palestine. The Haganah was already existed in 1920. So this is how it went. And part of what he did was a bluff, because he appeared before people as the leader of the Jewish people. And truthfully, after 1918, 1917, 18, 19, etc., the Jewish people were in fact enamored with this idea that we have this declaration. There might be a country somewhere called Palestine that is going to be ours one day. So, but he had no real power. And I mean, he did all kinds of things that you'd think today is just not possible to do. He also, in 1930, after the riots in Palestine in 1929, the British did what they always did. They sent a commission to Palestine to investigate, came back and said immigration to Palestine has to slow down.
Jewish immigration
has to slow down, etc., etc. and they were about to produce a white paper, which eventually they did. Weizmann went to see the prime minister, and he says to him, if you go ahead with this, I'm going to resign my position as the president of the Zionist organization. Now, anybody would have said to him, so go ahead, resign, what do I care? Not the prime minister. Prime minister knew that would be a major problem for England, because Weizmann knew people in parliament of all parties. He was able to topple the prime minister, and the prime minister did something. He sent another commission that said that's the details not important. He rescinded the white paper. Now you have to understand something. In the entire history of Great Britain, it's never happened before that an individual was able to persuade the government to rescind a white paper. In fact, no white paper has ever been rescinded.
Just for the listener, a white paper is...
It's a law.
Yeah, those are documents that really hurt the Jews in Palestine back then, basically.
And it has
Sanctions.
never happened again.
Mm-hmm.
So you ask me again, where does this power come from? Personality.
No, in
God.
politics.
And politics and ability
deep
to...
understanding of politics.
Of course, yes. That's part of that personality, the ability to become a friend. As I said before, Weizmann acted and was British.
Mm-hmm.
He looked British, he dressed British, he lived British,
Mm-hmm.
and also a Zionist. And a Jew who was
But-
never shy to state again clearly who he was.
Was there any indication before he became... When this is a two-part question. When abouts did he become obsessed with the idea of a Jewish state? And was there any indication that he had this fervor or this like drive to, galvanize people towards a cause, people of the highest levels, before or in relation to anything but the Jewish state?
Weizmann left behind him 25,000 letters. He knew from early age somehow that he's going to play some role in history. And so he kept copies of everything he wrote. At the age of 11, he already wrote a letter. He must have heard it in the community that talks about the power of England and that England would never abandon the Jews. Now, where he heard it, I don't know, but the letter exists. Now, I don't take a letter of an 11-year-old as an indication of what will happen in the future. But many Jews believed that England was interested in the fate of the Jewish people. It was a strong religious pro-Zionist movement in England from the 19th century on. So it was not a far-fetched idea. Why do we have 25,000 copies? Because Weizmann had a notion that he's going to be doing something great. And so he kept copies of all of these letters. And by the way, very often, I mean, this is before all the instruments we have today, he wrote, sometimes by hand, most of the time by hand, until he became president of the Zionist organization when it was typed. And he kept copies of everything, which is why we know so much about him. And so did he know that he is going to shake the Jewish world? Probably not. But he knew he's going to do something that's of importance. And he got involved really in Zionist affairs when he moved from Russia through Germany, eventually to Switzerland, where there was a big colony of Jewish emigres to Swiss universities because they accepted both women and men, which was unusual. And there he joined the Zionist, sort of quasi-Zionist organizations. And, they had a lot of fun fighting the Bund and fighting all kinds of other anti-Jewish organizations. They're all very poor. Got his doctorate in chemistry and then moved to Great Britain.
If he was indeed so influential and so powerful amongst the corridors of the parliament, and how come he didn't persuade the British, the Allies, to bomb Auschwitz, for example?
A very good question. After 1937, his power really waned. The British were worried about their fate, which, as you know, could have been a disaster. And his influence waned after that.
Even though he knew Churchill personally.
Even though he knew Churchill. And what Churchill did, who, by the way, was exact same age as Weizmann, and Churchill refused to see him. And people would say, well, why are you refusing to see him? He said that he was sick, he was going away. But he said, I know that if I were to meet Weizmann, I'd have to do what he asked me to do. And so I avoided him.
Smart guy.
And Churchill was very fond of him, of Weizmann. The relationship broke down after the murder of Lord Moyne. Remember Lord Moyne in Egypt? Was a good friend of Churchill's. He was a representative of the British government. He was killed by either Lehi or Irgun, I don't remember anymore. And that's when Churchill cooled off on Weizmann, but it didn't matter anymore. This was sort of toward the end of the war.
So what did he try to do during the Holocaust?
What Weizmann did is immediately in the early 1930s, he began to work on behalf of, first of all, German Jewish refugees to the extent that he could. And he took on, and then it expanded to Holland, to Belgium, to France, etc. It was successful only up to a point.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, he was also a great fundraiser. He was very, very adept. Again, for the same reasons that I'm explaining. And look, you talked about before about women. This personality of his attracted both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
People were very much attracted to him, and he could not live without company at all times.
Like a cult leader vibes.
Not a cult leader, I would say, but as somebody who made them feel important.
How do you think, after writing this book and doing so much research on him, what do you think his perspective would be on the current predicament of the state of Israel, the current predicament of Zionism?
Before I answer the question, Weizmann, let me put it some other way. Arabs today don't realize that Weizmann in the 1920s and 1930s did more for the promotion of an Arab state or Palestinian state or whatever it would have been called than any of the Arab leaders. In 1918, immediately after the war, one of the first things he did, he was not yet the president of the World Zionist Organization, but he was an important person because of his war relationship. He went to see the Emir Faisal, the son of the Sharif of Mecca. And he said to him, you know what? You need an Arab country. You need an Arab land. I'll help you. The Jews will help you. Now, where he came up with this, I have no idea, because the Jews could do nothing. But he said that we will help you. And he and the Emir signed a contract that talked about the fact that the Jewish people and the Arabs will come to an agreement on how to divide the land. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, and even the 40s, Weizmann always promoted a division of the land.
The land because back then the British Empire went far beyond
he was talking about
Palestine.
He's talking about the land sometimes between the river and the sea, as they say today, sometimes beyond.
Beyond, right. When it's beyond, obviously, it's a bit easier to divide than...
When he persuaded the British in 1937 to come out with a paper that divided the land.
Mm-hmm.
And again did it in 1947. He persuaded Ben-Gurion, who did not want to agree to this. As Weizmann said, I would rather have a country the size of a handkerchief rather than not have a piece of land which could save Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And but of course the Arabs rejected it every time, so it did not. He had a mantra that was unusual for his time. He said, we Jews don't want to rule, but we also don't want to be ruled. We can work together. And he really believed that the creation of an Arab state in part of that entity of Palestine would be good for the Zionist organization.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pro two-state solution.
Absolutely.
I see.
It's interesting because some of those characters from that period, are today they represent the left, like Berl Katzenelson, for example. But when you delve into their quotes, you see they would vote Ben Gvir today, probably, with some of their quotes about politics, about the Arabs, but not in Weizmann's case. You won't find extreme, even during the Independence War, he remained a lefty.
He was not a lefty. He was a Zionist patriot. He was not a lefty at all.
Mm-hmm.
And he believed that we need to fight if we have to save ourselves. It's not like we were peaceniks and, we're just going to raise our hands and go to the slaughter. But he really believed, as I said, not to rule, not to be ruled. And he said something else. Another mantra of his was, Zion will be redeemed in justice. In other words, if we are just, if we behave justly, everything will come together.
Do you think he would still hold those same views today?
You want me to guess?
I don't know. Maybe we could do
He's
a seance.
a historian.
Maybe we could do a seance.
Yeah. He never wavered in all those years, despite the Holocaust. We're talking also post-Holocaust.
Well, that's interesting, though. You bring up the Holocaust. What were his views on, or did he ever express views on how Germany should be dealt with, either through the war or post-World War II?
No. I think, and I have no proof, but knowing Weizmann as I do, that he shied away from... he felt he did not do enough during the Holocaust to save Jews. Now, as I said before, in the 1930s, he began to try to find ways to save German Jews, then Austrian Jews, then other communities. But he always felt we didn't do enough. Didn't do enough in Palestine, didn't do enough in the Zionist organization.
So, first of all, it's very interesting, and I think it's basically the first biography ever written about
No,
Weizmann?
there have been other biographies.
Okay.
But, first of all, Weizmann wrote an autobiography.
Okay.
It's called Trial and Error. It's one of the most interesting autobiographies of Zionist leaders, except for one thing. A lot of the stuff is not true. Because when you ask somebody to write his autobiography, he writes for posterity. So I've uncovered many of that, but it doesn't matter. And by the way, he did not end up writing it. He hired a...
Shadow ghostwriter.
But he... and it's not surprising. He wanted... he always felt he did not get his due in the Zionist organization, which he didn't. He's not a signer for the Declaration of Independence.
Why?
He was out of the country. But if you have it here, you'll see. The Declaration of Independence has a space after the Vav.
Oh, really? They left a space?
Yeah. So, it's not clear whether they left it for Weizmann or not. Weizmann thought that they did. He wanted, when he became president, he did want to sign the declaration. Ben-Gurion wouldn't let him.
Uh-huh. I bet Ben-Gurion timed it so just when he's abroad, they'll sign it.
No. But Ben-Gurion never forgot, and he paid him back and made sure that he was in Rehovot, in his place. Was happy when Weizmann was out of the country. Weizmann loved to go to Switzerland, and gave him no power. He had zero power, and he was very disappointed at first when he was asked to become president. He thought he was in America at the time. He thought, well, president like Truman. But obviously that's not
Yeah,
the
he was
presidency.
duped. No, and ever since, of course, generations and generations of presidents found out the same thing, that
That's
it's
right.
a meaningless... it's like including his nephew, right? Ezer Weizmann was his nephew.
That's correct.
He didn't have kids?
Who?
Chaim Weizmann.
No, he did. He
did
had two sons
Okay.
with Vera Weizmann. One died in World War II. He was a pilot, and he fell over France. The other one, Benji, lived many years after him, was totally disinterested in the Zionist movement. Vera Weizmann, and Weizmann too, did not do well with her children. And Weizmann, first of all, was traveling all the time. He was somewhere in the world. Vera Weizmann, I'm going to be killed for this by many people, was a very cold woman who didn't really don't want the children around her. I mean, they had maids. They had all kinds of people who took care of the kids.
Mm-hmm.
The one who died was their favorite son.
Mm-hmm.
Benji was interested in the humanities. His parents tried to force him, as it were, to go into the sciences. He hated the sciences, and he failed. And he grew up very disenchanted. He married once a Jewish woman, a doctor, in fact, and they had one son, who, by the way, is still alive. And
Did you interview him for the...
in England. Mm-hmm. And he's quite elderly now,
Mm-hmm.
but still, he's totally with it. And they shunted him to schools, to private schools, etc. Didn't want the kids around.
Mm-hmm.
And so Benji divorced his wife. He married a woman he met in a bar, whom I also met, and ended up a very unhappy, drunk. I don't remember when he died.
Wow.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit, because it's not every day that we have a very esteemed scholar and a professor from a high-profile university here on the podcast, and those are turbulent times in American academia. So how does it feel, first of all, to you as a Jewish professor? Do you, like, I didn't hear what's going on in your university.
Brandeis.
Are there any encampments there?
In Brandeis, there was very little, very little movement.
But you hear from colleagues probably, and you studied in Columbia also, so you know Columbia
right.
quite well.
And Harvard.
And Harvard, right, and Brandeis, and nothing of any importance worth talking about at Brandeis at that point.
Right. But in general, the academia, the Ivy League, how do you see this?
You know, if somebody would have told me that this is going to be like a tsunami in all of these institutions all over the country, not just the Ivy Leagues, I would have said, no, not possible. If somebody would have told me that it's also laced with anti-Semitism, I would have said, not possible. But here it is. And I think it came as a shock to many of us. Not that there is an anti-Israeli or anti-Semitic notions everywhere in society, but the force of it, I think, was really surprising. And you know, I thought you would ask me why do presidents let it happen? Why is it happening?
Presidents of the universities.
Of universities. Look, you know, I was president for many years, and I've had lots of interaction, continue to, with many presidents.
What years you were the president of Brandeis?
From
the 90s till 2010, right?
From 94 to 2010, 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the average life of a president in America today is 5 years and going down. Because it's an impossible job. I mean, it's a very difficult job. It's a thankless job.
Especially if you faked your PhD to get there.
Right. Or if you
it wasn't as easy faking it back then without ChatGPT.
That's true. So presidents want to hold on to their chairs. They want to please. What is the biggest task of a president of the United States, of a university president, is to raise money. If you aggravate too many people, you're not going to raise money. I think, look, in places like Harvard, Columbia, Yale, etc. If they don't raise money for a while, it's not going to make a difference. Other institutions, it does make a difference because they don't have those kinds of endowments. And most universities did not follow up on their own rules as to what to do. And when they did, it came too late. There are a few universities that did it right. For example, the University of Florida, which is a very large university.
And Texas.
And University of Florida, what they did is very simple. They had a long document. The first 2 lines were, what is it that you are allowed to do on the campus? And then about 20 items, what you're not allowed to do, but not only what you're not allowed to do, but what is going to be the punishment for each one of these separate acts. And nobody did anything at the University of Florida. So the president decided, hey, I'm going to actually run this place. And so the question is also, what's free debate? Can you have a free speech? Can you have free debate on the campus, etc.? Yes, but if you think to yourself, would any other minority on any campus in America today suffer the same kind of fate that Jewish students now have, where they try not to wear their kippot if they can, wear a hat instead, not to show their Magen David or anything else, and to try to hide and pretend they're not Jewish. That's one of the things that is really astounding to me.
But what I wonder is if you have maybe perspective on why did this happen specifically on college campuses or university. I mean, it could have happened in high tech. It could have happened in fast food chain restaurants. It could have happened in a bunch of different places where people made protests or making campaigns. But it happened on college campuses. Is it because they're young and stupid? Is it because what is it that led to this kind of?
First of all, I don't think that they're all stupid.
Not all of them, but
but as many studies have shown, they don't know what their slogans mean. When you said from the river to the sea, there were a number of people who pointed it out by interviewing students, college campus students, and say, which river, what sea? People didn't know. Can you point out to me where Gaza is? It's somewhere in the Middle East. They didn't know. So a lot of it is just sort of following the crowd. A lot of it also has to do with faculty who teach. Look, my own daughter, my younger daughter, this goes many years back, she went to an Ivy League school, and Brown. And one day she came home and she said to me, Abba, isn't it true that we stole all the land from the Palestinians and drove them into exile? So
wrong question to ask a historian.
So
you set her down for a seminar.
So I asked her, where did you get this from? And she said, that's what I learned in school, in my history class. So we did a seminar, a home seminar, and she still is I would say a very good Zionist. But that's what kids also learn. And they also hear from other people. And, maybe for some of them it's fun to riot on the campus, etc. It doesn't mean that they don't have the right to free speech, but violent free speech. People ask me very often, how do you want Jews to be treated on the campus? I say, I want them to be treated like any other minority. Would you treat somebody of any other minority on campuses today as you treat the Jews? And would that even happen? And there's no good answer for that. I think what astounded everybody is that the anti-Semitism that was part of it came out in such force that people did not anticipate. And, a lot of it is influenced by social media. It's influenced by TV. It's influenced by...
I think even more so, like what's even more astounding, forget about the anti-Semitism, or the anti-Zionism, okay? That maybe, we could have, but they actively support Hamas, right? It's even worse than just being an anti-Zionist. They actively support the murder, the rape, the killing of children, right? So that's like
They said the quiet stuff out loud. I think it was always like that. They just said the quiet stuff out loud.
Okay.
I am willing to bet that almost none of them read the Hamas Declaration, which goes back many, many years back. In fact, I published it in some book, doesn't matter. And clearly states who they are and what they are and what they want. I mean, it's very clear.
Mm-hmm.
So what they, by the way, today in America, you're not going to hear about October 7th. You're not going to hear about it. You're going to hear about the fact that there are tens of thousands of Gazans who have been killed, and all the explanation one wants to give, they've been used by the Hamas, etc., doesn't wash. People just look. It is a tragedy. Kids are being killed, etc., etc. But and by the way, there's now a new new findings that the numbers are much lower, but it doesn't matter. Whether it's 20 or 35 or 40, they all make a negative impression on the public. So they hold on to that, and what's happening. Israel is now a pariah state in many places in the world, and I worry about what that means for Israel in the future. Even if the war were to end today, what does it mean for the future? What does it mean in terms of countries wanting to have any relationship with Israel, etc.?
So what do you think is the best way forward, considering that?
I think that, we've done a lousy job of explaining what's going on. That's number one. And we have a government in Israel who seems to be intent not to pay attention to Israel's best friend, who is President Biden. And I think that's a mistake.
You think President Biden is our best friend?
Absolutely. I don't think that...
the America and the American people, or President Biden specifically?
I don't think that there's been a president of the United States ever who has been as... friendly and caring about Israel as President Biden.
One thing I have to ask you, Professor, would you, if you had today a son, a daughter, or a grandson, or a granddaughter who asked you, should I go to one of the Ivy League universities, would you recommend for it? Or maybe you would send her to the Hebrew or to Weizmann Institute? Or
to Duke?
It's not a question. I would say to them, go study in Israel.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
That's a big statement.
I went to Ivy League schools. I don't think I got a good education in Ivy League schools. You know where I got the best education? In two other institutions. I also have a degree from JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary. Got the best education there in history that I didn't get at Columbia. I didn't get at Harvard. And Brandeis was the other one. In those days, it's before you guys were born, the faculty in those institutions where faculty came from abroad. These were refugees who were saved, or for whatever reason, and great scholars and great teachers. And things change with time. If you can get today at a university in the United States a BA in DEI. You know what DEI is? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can get a BA. Then you have to say to yourself, these are going to be our leaders in the future. They're going to run this country.
We'll miss Trump.
What kind of a country will it be?
But why stop at getting a degree or studying in an Israeli university? Why not move here? Do you think that
first of all, you didn't ask me.
So do you think? So here I go. Do you think that there is a reason? Like, do you think in the context of the book that you've written and Chaim Weizmann's life, isn't today, with the existence of a Jewish state, the most Zionist thing someone can do to move to Israel? I mean,
Absolutely. I agree.
So why would you go as far to say that any Jew living abroad in America specifically should move here as soon as possible?
I think that people should move here if they really feel this is the place they want to be. I don't think that everybody should move here. I think there's also an advantage of having Jews abroad who can lobby, like in America, for example. I wouldn't dismiss it. But you asked me about my family? Absolutely. And I think it's really an opportunity now for Israeli universities to attract Jewish students. You know where Jewish students go today to? I mean, it happened so quickly. They go to Catholic institutions, Catholic universities. Why? Because the Catholics have discipline. They want the Jews to come, and Jews will feel welcome and safe. And it's something that most people don't know about, but they don't feel safe in many other institutions.
Okay, so the new book, let's plug it one last time. It's out everywhere, Amazon, Kindle,
everywhere.
Bookshops. The title?
Chaim Weizmann, a biography, right?
That's right.
Okay,
by Professor Jehuda Reinharz and
Moti Golani.
Professor Moti Golani. Thank you so much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. Anything else you want to plug before? Tell us a bit, like in a sentence, about the Mandel Institute.
Oh, with pleasure. The Mandel Foundation was created by Mort, Jack, and Joe, as you mentioned before. 3 brothers who came from a very poor family, immigrant family, to the United States. Mort was the only one who was born in America. And these 3 brothers, I'm making a short story. The 3 brothers took on a failing business from one of their uncles, which produced these bolts for tires, to tighten the tires. And what they did is they didn't sit in their shop and wait for somebody to come. They went to garages all over the first Cleveland and beyond, and they asked, what do you guys need that you don't get? What is a piece of equipment, car equipment or whatever, that you would love to have but you can't get? And people would tell them, and then they became experts in how to find those parts, bring them, etc. They also didn't gouge prices. I mean, they didn't. Anyhow, long story is they became very wealthy, and the Mandels had something like 14 different kinds of factories who did different kinds of things. I once asked Mort how many of them failed. He said 1. So it was a pretty good record. And they decided early on in the early 1950s to create a foundation. Before they even had these, I mean, they became very wealthy. But that's when they began to have money, and started to fund all kinds of organizations, Jewish organizations, non-Jewish organizations. And finally, in 1990, they created the first foothold here in Israel, and which was a school for education. And the idea was to really improve the level of education in this country, and which was very successful. It had a lot of support from the ministry, etc. And over time, they expanded. It all happened because in 1967 also, Mort and his wife, Barbara, came to Israel for the first time. After the war, they had to come to Israel, and they became instant Zionists. And so over time, we've probably given close to $1 billion for all kinds of areas here in Israel. We have offices in the Negev, in the Galil. and of course in Jerusalem, which is our headquarters. And we have a whole bunch of other programs. We have programs with the army, with the police, with the Shabak. We have who all come to us. We don't come to them. We have obviously for the School of Education, which continues to be very effective. We have programs for youth trying to be productive, and we continue to now since the war. We're very clear about what our areas of interest are, and our major area of interest, or two areas of interest, is the humanities, which are falling apart all over the world, and obviously Jewish studies, Jewish education, Jewish life, but also other areas. And we just continue to expand. When the war started, of course, we did something that is outside our area of the mission of statement of the Mandel Foundation, and supported all kinds of things, particularly in the area of mental health, and which is a major problem, as you know, but also all kinds of other things. And we will continue as long as there's need for it.
Amazing.
Incredible.
Thank you
really
so
is,
much.
Right? Like
Yeah.
how these three. I mean, they're not famous.
No.
They're three Jews became extremely wealthy immigrants
By innovation.
and back in the 50s, and since then hundreds of millions, close to $1 billion. That's an incredible story.
It's not only that they were not famous, they never wanted to have any publicity about them.
Like Chaim Weizmann.
Didn't want publicity.
Yeah.
And, many other organizations like ours publish all kinds of things too. We don't do it.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. Bye,
Thank
guys.
you.
See you on the next one.
Till the next time.